I was always the type to go hiking alone. It gave me a kind of peace I couldn't find anywhere else. Some people don't get that, but there's something about the steady rhythm of my boots on the dirt, the quiet rustle of the trees, the feel of the air when I'm far from cars and phones and stores. That's where I feel normal. It was early spring when I decided to spend a weekend camping in the Little Pines Trail area. It's a pretty popular spot, not too far from the border of my home state and the neighboring one. The trail wasn't overly difficult, but it had some great views, some peaceful campgrounds, and if you hit the right spots, you wouldn't have to see too many other people. That was always the goal for me. A couple hours from my town by car, it was far enough to feel like I was getting away, but close enough I could make a weekend trip without too much planning. I didn't pick the location for any special reason. I just wanted to get outside, clear my head, and maybe test out some new gear I'd picked up. I'd been working long hours, sitting at a desk all week, and I needed to stretch my legs and reset. I packed up my usual supplies: tent, sleeping bag, basic food, first aid kit, water, maps, the works. I've done enough solo trips to know what I need and how to pack light without skipping the essentials. The weather was good when I left. Chilly at night, but warm enough during the day. Early spring is my favorite time to hike. Fewer bugs, fewer crowds, and the woods still have that sharp, clean smell from winter. The trails can be muddy, sure, but I don't mind that. I left my house around 7 in the morning and made it to the trailhead a little after 9. I parked, double-checked my gear, signed in at the trail register, and set off. The trail was just how I remembered it from a few years back. Lots of tall pines, soft dirt underfoot, little streams trickling over smooth rocks. Birds were calling from the trees, and I passed a few hikers now and then, but for the most part, I had the path to myself. I hiked for about 4 hours that first day, taking my time, stopping to eat some sandwiches and drink water, snapping a few pictures here and there. My plan was to camp near a quiet offshoot of the main trail, about 8 miles in. There was a small clearing there near a creek that I'd used before. It's not an official campsite, but it's flat, and there's a natural windbreak from some thick trees and rocks on one side. When I got there, I set up my tent, gathered some dry wood, and settled in for the evening. That night was peaceful. I made a small fire, cooked some instant noodles, and sat staring at the flames until the sky went dark and the stars came out. It was the kind of quiet I look for, just the soft rustling of trees and the occasional crack of a twig in the distance. Nothing threatening, probably deer moving through the brush. I slept well and woke up early, just as the sun was starting to light up the tops of the trees. I boiled some water for coffee, ate a protein bar, and packed up my camp. I wasn't in a rush. My plan was to make a big loop, another 10 or 12 miles through the woods, circling back toward the trailhead by the end of the second day. About halfway through that second day, I stopped for a break near a wide, flat section of the trail where the trees opened up a bit. There was a big rock there, sitting just off the path, and I remember setting down my pack and drinking some water, just enjoying the breeze. That's when I noticed it. Sitting right there on the rock was a name tag. It was the kind you clip onto your shirt or jacket, made of metal, not paper. It was scratched up a bit, the corners dull from being knocked around. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. The name hit me like a slap. David R., University of Central Mountain. My heart paused in my chest. David R. wasn't just some random hiker. That was my old college roommate. I hadn't seen him in years, probably close to 10 at that point. We'd lost touch after school. Life had pulled us in different directions. He'd moved out of state, started teaching, maybe coaching too, I wasn't sure. I remembered seeing something about him hiking with some students from his school, maybe a few months back, but I hadn't paid much attention to where they'd gone. Just a passing photo on social media, something like that. But this wasn't just any name tag. It had our school's logo etched on it. Same shape, same metal plate, same font. I knew it was his. There weren't many people with his exact name who would have had that exact name tag from our school. I looked around, half expecting him to come walking up the trail, but the woods were empty. There was nobody nearby, no sound but the birds and the wind. I turned the tag over again, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It looked like it had been there a while. Dust settled into the scratches, a faint ring of dirt around where it had been resting on the rock. I couldn't tell if it had been dropped recently or if it had sat there through rain and sun and snow for months. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it, feeling this weird, unsettled weight in my stomach. I'd chosen this trail at random. I hadn't spoken to David in years. The odds of me finding his name tag of all things in this spot in this way were hard to wrap my head around. It wasn't the kind of thing you could just shrug off. I slipped the tag into my pocket and kept walking, but the rest of the day felt strange. My boots felt heavier. The trees seemed taller. I couldn't stop thinking about how it ended up there. I thought about the last time I'd seen him, moving out of our shared apartment, tossing a duffel bag into the back of his old car, telling me to keep in touch. I thought about the years in between, jobs, moves, the slow slide into routine that keeps you from calling people you used to see every day. When I got back to my car that evening, I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through old messages and contacts until I found his number. I stared at it for a while but didn't call. I wasn't sure if he still had the same number. I wasn't even sure what I would say. Instead, I drove home, the name tag sitting on the passenger seat like some strange passenger. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked around, looked up some people we'd both known in school, just out of curiosity. Eventually, I found someone who still talked to him. They told me he was doing fine, still teaching, still hiking now and then. I ended up digging through my old social media accounts and found his profile. It looked like he'd posted some photos from a hiking trip about 6 months before, same general area where I'd found the tag. The timestamps matched. He'd gone camping with a few students from his school, taken a weekend trip. One of the photos even showed him wearing the name tag clipped to his backpack strap. I stared at that photo for a long time, felt like stepping back through a weird little door. Eventually, I messaged him. I told him I'd found something he might want back. Took a few days, but he wrote back. He was surprised, told me he must have lost it on that trip months ago. He didn't even remember when it had fallen off. He figured it had probably come unclipped somewhere along the trail. We didn't get into much more than that, just some catching up, swapping a few old memories, laughing about the coincidence. But I kept thinking about it long after the messages stopped, about how small the world can be and how sometimes, without meaning to, we circle back to people and places we thought we'd left behind. There wasn't anything supernatural about it. It wasn't a sign or a message. It was just something that happened. A strange, wild coincidence, sure, but nothing more than that. And yet, it stuck with me. Sometimes I wonder how many other pieces we leave behind out there, without knowing it. Little markers of where we've been, waiting for someone else to stumble across them. Sometimes they're just trash. Sometimes they're nothing. And sometimes they bring you back to someone you hadn't thought about in years. I still have the name tag. I keep it on a shelf near my hiking gear, a little scratched up reminder of that weekend. We don't talk often, but now and then, I'll get a message from him, or I'll send him a picture from a new trail I've tried. It's nothing big, nothing dramatic. Just that quiet connection that's still there, even after all the years. It's funny how something so small can make the world feel just a little bit closer. It happened years ago, but I still think about it now and then, especially when I'm hiking or fishing in places that feel too quiet, too empty. I've told this story to a few people in passing, but most don't seem to think much of it. Maybe that's fair. It's not some crazy tale with a monster or a ghost. It's not something that would make the news or anything like that. But the details stuck with me. They still stick with me. It was one summer when a couple friends and I decided to spend a weekend fishing in Alaska. We weren't deep in the backcountry. The spot we picked was a known fishing area, somewhere you could get to without too much effort if you didn't mind some rough gravel roads. It wasn't exactly crowded, but it wasn't one of those places where you could hike for hours and not see another person. There was a decent gravel parking lot, a marked trail, some clearings along the riverbanks where people often fished. It was the kind of place where you'd usually run into at least a few other groups during the day. We got there early on a Saturday morning. I remember the chill in the air, the way the sun hadn't fully warmed up the trail yet, and how the trees still held that cold dampness from the night before. The trail to the river was short, maybe 15-20 minutes of easy walking. We parked, threw our gear over our shoulders, and hiked in without really thinking much about anything. We were there to fish, not to explore or camp. Just a day trip. The fishing itself was good. Not amazing, but good enough. We found a bend in the river that looked promising and set up there for a few hours. The water was clear, the current steady but not too fast, and we managed to pull in a few decent-sized fish. Nothing record-breaking, but the kind of catch that makes you feel like the trip was worth it. We stayed out there most of the morning and into the early afternoon. I remember feeling relaxed, just enjoying the rhythm of casting and reeling, the weight of the rod in my hands, the sound of the river. There weren't many other people around. We saw a couple guys fishing farther upstream, but no one close to us. It wasn't busy, but it wasn't silent wilderness either. Eventually, we decided to call it a day. We packed up our gear, cleaned up the spot, and started heading back toward the car. The trail wasn't long. Like I said, it wound through the trees in a slow, easy climb. The ground was packed dirt with patches of gravel, pretty well maintained, with enough space for two people to walk side by side. The kind of trail you could bring your family on without worrying too much. We were maybe 5 or 10 minutes from the parking lot when we saw it. It was sitting right there in the middle of the trail. A smartphone, face down on the dirt, like someone had dropped it while walking. At first, we just walked past it. I think one of us pointed it out, but no one immediately stopped. After a few steps, I doubled back and picked it up. It was a newer model phone, not the latest one, but something that people were still using a lot at the time. It had a dark blue case that was scratched on the corners, like it had been dropped more than once before. The screen was a little dusty, but it wasn't cracked. It wasn't buried under leaves or anything. It was just there, right in the middle of the trail where anyone could see it. I pressed the power button, and the screen lit up. It wasn't locked. The home screen showed a photo of a man standing next to a big pickup truck, holding a fishing rod. He was wearing sunglasses and smiling, probably somewhere nearby since the truck had Alaska plates. There were a couple of notification icons on the screen, missed calls, texts, stuff like that. I tapped one, but there was no signal, not even a flicker of service. That wasn't surprising. This part of the trail didn't get reception. Even back at the parking lot, it was hit or miss. You usually had to drive closer to town before you could get any bars. It was a weird feeling, standing there with someone's phone in my hand, knowing there was no way to contact them right away. I remember looking around, thinking maybe whoever dropped it would come walking back down the trail, realizing they'd lost it. But no one came. We waited there for a minute or two, just listening to the sounds around us. There wasn't much, just the rustling of the trees, the crunch of gravel under our boots, and the faint buzz of bugs in the air. We kept walking, figuring we'd either run into the owner in the parking lot or we'd figure out what to do with the phone once we got back to town. But when we reached the parking lot, it was empty except for our truck. No other cars, no people packing up their gear. No one else was there. It was a strange thing because when we'd parked that morning, there had been a few other vehicles scattered around. I specifically remembered a beat-up red SUV and a white van parked across from us. Now, the lot was bare. Maybe they'd all left before us. Maybe they were somewhere else on a longer trail. Who knows? But the fact that the lot was empty and we'd found the phone so close to it, just sitting out in the open, made the whole thing feel off. We climbed into the truck and I tossed the phone onto the dashboard. I remember thinking we'd probably just drop it off at a ranger station or the nearest gas station with a lost and found. But something about it bothered me. I kept glancing at it as we bounced along the gravel road back toward town. About 10 minutes down the road, I picked it up again and tried to check the call history or recent messages, thinking maybe I could find a clue about the owner, maybe call one of their recent contacts. But when I pressed the power button this time, the screen didn't light up. It was completely dead. I thought maybe the battery had finally died, but it didn't make much sense. The phone had been on just 20 or 30 minutes before, and the battery indicator had shown plenty of charge left. It wasn't like it had been on 1% or anything. I tried pressing the button a few more times. Nothing. When we got back to town, we pulled into a small gas station to get some drinks and decide what to do with the phone. I remember getting out of the truck, holding the phone in my hand, and realizing it felt colder than it should. like it had been sitting in a freezer. The air wasn't that cold, but the phone felt like metal on a winter day. I tried turning it on again. Nothing. I don't remember exactly what we did with it after that. I think we might have left it at the gas station, or maybe we dropped it at the local police station's lost and found. None of us were really sure what the right move was. It wasn't a big town, and there weren't many places to leave something like that. I didn't think much more about it for a while, just a random thing that happened. But over the next few weeks, little details started to sit with me in a weird way. For one, the phone had been right in the middle of the trail, not off to the side, not partially hidden. It was like someone had set it down there carefully, not like it had just fallen out of a pocket by accident. And it wasn't wet or dirty like you'd expect if it had been sitting out there for long. It looked like it had been placed there recently, like maybe just before we'd walked by. And the lot had been empty. That was the part that kept nagging at me. If someone had dropped the phone while heading to their car, wouldn't they have noticed before they left? Wouldn't they have come back to look for it? It didn't add up. I also couldn't figure out why the phone had turned off so quickly after we picked it up. Phones don't just die that fast. I thought maybe the owner had remotely shut it off, but there hadn't been any signal in the area. You'd need at least a flicker of service to send a remote shutdown. Out there, you got nothing until you were at least 20 or 30 minutes closer to town. I thought about the photo on the home screen sometimes. The man next to the pickup truck, smiling like it was just another good fishing day. I wondered if that was him, if he'd been there that day, if he'd somehow lost the phone right before we showed up. Or maybe it wasn't even his phone anymore. Maybe it had been out there longer than I realized. But if that was the case, why was it so clean? Why was it sitting right there in plain sight? I don't know. Maybe someone else had picked it up before us and left it there. Maybe the owner realized they'd lost it and came back. But by the time they did, we'd already picked it up. Maybe the phone shutting off was just some weird technical issue. But the way it happened, the timing of it all, stuck with me. Every time I've gone hiking since then, I've been more aware of the little things people leave behind. Water bottles, snack wrappers, random pieces of gear. And sometimes I wonder about the stories behind them. Who dropped them, when, why. And I think about that phone. It wasn't the most remote place I've been to, not by a long shot. It wasn't deep wilderness. It was a place where people fish and walk and park their trucks. It should have been a normal day, but that quiet stretch of trail, the empty parking lot, the dead phone, it all lingers in the back of my mind. I guess the truth is, not everything has to end with a big, clear answer. Some things just happen. You find something that doesn't make sense. You do what you can with it, and then you leave it behind. But you don't always forget it. Some things just stay with you. I've always liked hiking alone. Some people don't get that. They ask me why I would go out by myself, where there's no one to talk to, no one to help if something goes wrong, no one to keep me company. But that's the point for me. When I'm out there, just me, the trees, the dirt under my boots, I can think. I can breathe. I can be quiet without anyone expecting anything from me. The world feels smaller and more manageable when it's just me on the trail. I've done a lot of solo hikes over the years, mostly in Arizona, where there are more trails than most people realize. I like to find the ones that don't show up on newer maps, the ones that have been mostly forgotten. That's where the real quiet is. No loud families, no weekend hikers with speakers in their backpacks, no runners blowing past you. Just dirt, rocks, trees, and whatever else the desert wants to show you. One day I picked a trail I'd seen in an old guidebook from the 80s. It was a loop trail about 2 hours outside Flagstaff. The book said it used to be a logging route but hadn't been maintained in years. It wasn't on the park's new trail maps. I double-checked satellite images and found what looked like the old trail still winding through the trees. Faint but there. It seemed perfect. I like places that have been left alone. I packed light but carefully, the way I always do. Enough water, some protein bars, a first aid kit, a multi-tool, a flashlight, my compass, and my GPS. Even though I'm careful, I always bring a paper map too. You never know when batteries will die or a signal will drop. I got to the trailhead mid-morning. It wasn't even a real parking lot, just a patch of flat dirt with an old wooden post that had once held a trail sign. The wood was cracked, the paint long gone. There were no other cars, no trash, no signs that anyone had been there recently. The trail started out narrow and overgrown but still passable. Pine needles covered the ground, softening my steps. The air smelled like dry wood and old earth. As I walked, I felt the quiet settle over me, and I liked it. It was just me and the trail. For the first couple of hours, the hike was exactly what I wanted. The path wound up a low ridge, opening up to scattered views of rolling green hills with little pockets of dry grass. There were no markers, but I kept an eye on my compass and my GPS to make sure I was still on track. At one point, I passed an old rusted-out frame of what must have been some kind of logging machine decades ago. It was half buried in dirt and covered in moss. I stopped and looked at it for a while, thinking about how things get left behind, how the forest slowly takes them back. I snapped a few photos but didn't touch it. I like leaving things where they are. As I moved along, I came to a clearing that wasn't marked on my map. It was strange because the trees opened up in a perfect circle, and it looked like people had been there a long time ago. I could see old metal parts scattered around, broken pieces of tools, maybe some old oil cans, all rusted through. There was a blackened fire pit that had collapsed in on itself. It had been abandoned for years. At first, I thought I just stumbled across another piece of the old logging site, but something about it felt different, like the air was still and thick. I reminded myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I was alone. My heart was beating a little faster, but I pushed on. That's when I saw something odd. Off to the side, near some low bushes, there was a small tin can. It was one of those round metal tins that people sometimes use to store cookies or small tools. The lid was lying right next to it on the dirt. Something about it felt out of place. The logging junk made sense. This didn't. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't old enough to have been there for decades. It looked like it had been there for a while, sure, but maybe not more than a few years. I walked over to it, knelt down and picked it up. It wasn't heavy. I sat on a log nearby and opened it. Inside, I found folded pieces of paper. A lot of them. I pulled a few out and carefully unfolded them. The first one was just a list of names. 5 names, written in big, uneven letters. No dates, no other information. Just names. The next paper was similar, but only 3 names, and 2 of them had thick lines drawn through them, like someone had crossed them off. Another paper was a hand-drawn map. The landmarks were vague. Trees, a rock, something that looked like a creek, but I didn't recognize it. Could have been anywhere. I kept reading through the papers, each one stranger than the last. More names, some crossed out, some underlined, some circled, some with short notes scribbled next to them. Camped near the fallen tree, didn't return, stayed by the stream. It was starting to feel less like random notes and more like someone had been tracking people. My chest tightened as I read a note that simply said, "I can't do it. I'm leaving this behind. Hopefully whoever finds this understands." That line hit me hard. I looked back into the tin. There were more names, more rough maps, more scribbled notes, but that one stood out the most. I couldn't help but wonder, what couldn't they do? What were they planning to do? Had they been following people, maybe other hikers like me? Were the names people they'd watched? Or worse, I looked around the clearing. Everything was still, just trees and dry grass. But now the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like the place had been holding a secret, and now I'd uncovered it. I didn't want to leave the tin there. Something told me it shouldn't just be sitting out in the open. I put all the papers back inside, sealed the lid, and tucked it into my backpack. I figured I'd take it to the nearest ranger station when I finished the hike. They could figure out what to do with it. The rest of the hike changed after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there with me, maybe still was. Every crack of a twig made me flinch. Every shadow between the trees caught my eye. I told myself I was overreacting, that the tin was probably just from some strange person who left their private writings behind. But deep down, I knew it felt like something else. As I made my way down the looping part of the trail, I started noticing footprints in the dirt. At first, I thought they were mine from earlier, but something about them didn't line up. Some pointed in the opposite direction. Some were fresher than they should have been. I crouched down and studied them carefully. The patterns didn't match my boots. Someone else had been on the trail, maybe following me. Maybe I had passed them without noticing. Maybe they had been there before me. My stomach twisted as I realized the steps were going toward the clearing I'd just left. I picked up my pace. I kept looking back over my shoulder, scanning the trees, the brush, the path behind me. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone out there. When I finally got back to the parking lot, my car was still the only one there. I walked a slow circle around it, looking for tire tracks, boot prints, anything that might tell me someone else had come by. Nothing, just the same dry dirt I'd parked on earlier. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a while. I pulled the tin out of my pack and opened it again. That note was still on top. I can't do it. I'm leaving this behind. Hopefully whoever finds this understands. I read it over and over, thinking about what it meant. Maybe they had planned to hurt people. Maybe they had been following hikers for years, keeping lists, tracking movements. Maybe they had come to that clearing to finally go through with something but changed their mind at the last second. Maybe they just left the tin there and walked away from the whole thing. I hoped that was true. I hoped they left for good. But the footprints on the trail told me that maybe they hadn't. Maybe they'd come back. I drove straight to the ranger station and handed the tin over to the first ranger I saw. I told him where I found it, described the clearing, explained the footprints, explained everything. He nodded and said they'd look into it. He didn't seem overly surprised, which made me wonder if things like this happen more often than people think. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't follow up. I wanted to leave the whole thing behind, but I couldn't really. Even now, I still think about it sometimes. About those names, about those maps, about the crossed-off lists, about the person who almost did something, whatever it was, but didn't. I wonder if they really stopped, or if they just found another trail. I wonder if they just left that tin behind like some kind of confession or warning, hoping that whoever found it would figure it out. I like to believe they walked away from it all. I like to believe they left it behind and never went back. But I don't know that for sure. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my dad took my brother and me berry picking in northern Wisconsin. It wasn't a big planned trip or anything fancy. It was just one of those things we did in the summer when the wild berries were ripe. It was something simple, something people in that area did for fun or just to get some fresh berries to bring home. We weren't hikers or campers, just a dad and his 2 boys spending the afternoon out in the woods. The berry patch wasn't too far from the truck. It was maybe about half a mile in from the dirt road. I remember the road was one of those old gravel roads where you'd hear the crunch of the tires as you drove over it. It wasn't in the middle of nowhere, but it also wasn't right next to anything. No houses, no other cars, no people around. Just woods. Thick woods with tall trees, patches of sunlight poking through the leaves, and bushes with little bright berries hanging all over them. My brother and I were small, and everything about the woods felt big to us. The trees stretched up so high, and even though it wasn't very far from where we parked, I remember feeling like we had really gone deep into the forest. The ground was covered in leaves and twigs, some patches of soft moss, and here and there you'd see fallen logs with mushrooms growing out of them. It was the kind of place that smelled like damp earth, pine, and fresh air all mixed together. We had our little plastic buckets with us. They were just those cheap ones you'd get at a dollar store. My dad had a bigger metal pail. We were walking slowly, eyes down, picking berries as we went, dropping them into the buckets. They made this little soft sound as they hit the bottom, and over time, that sound got duller as the berries started to pile up. The day was quiet. I remember hearing birds, mostly. Every now and then there was the buzzing of some flies or bees near the bushes, and the occasional crackling sound when we stepped on dry branches. There was no wind that day, or at least not much of it. The air felt still, like everything was holding its breath. At the time, I didn't notice how still it was, but looking back, I realized how quiet the woods had gotten right before things changed. We had been there for maybe 20 or 30 minutes. My brother and I were focused on picking the best berries we could find. They were mostly small, deep blue ones, the kind that stained your fingers after a while. I remember thinking how good they'd taste in pancakes if we got enough. We weren't talking much. It was just the steady sound of berries dropping into the buckets and the occasional movement through the bushes as we shuffled around. Then, out of nowhere, there was this loud crash. Not just a stick breaking, but a loud, heavy crash, like something big had slammed into something else. It came from somewhere just ahead and to our right, deeper into the woods. It wasn't far away. I remember stopping dead in my tracks. My brother did too. My dad had already turned his head toward the sound. It was one of those noises that instantly changes everything around you. The birds stopped chirping. The buzzing insects seemed to vanish. Everything went quiet except for this heavy breathing sound that followed right after the crash. It was this deep, rough breathing, like air being sucked in and pushed out hard. Then came this loud, snorting sound, followed by grunting. It didn't sound like a deer. It didn't sound like anything small. Whatever it was big and it was close. My dad didn't panic, but he reacted right away. I remember that he moved to stand between us and the direction the sound came from. He didn't have to say anything. We just knew to stay behind him. He had his arms low at his sides, kind of holding them out a little like he was making sure we stayed back. The breathing, the grunting, the snorting, it all kept going. It wasn't just one sound and then silence. It kept coming, and it was moving. The sound was getting closer. It wasn't running toward us, but it was walking, moving in our direction steadily, and we still couldn't see it. The brush and trees were thick in that part of the woods, and whatever it was stayed hidden behind them. I remember looking hard, trying to catch a glimpse of it, but it was just out of sight, like it was behind a curtain of green. We started walking slowly back toward the truck. My dad was careful to keep his body between us and the sound the whole time. He didn't rush. He didn't let us run. We just walked steadily, step by step, trying not to make a lot of noise. The sound of the breathing and the grunting followed us. I could hear the brush rustling, twigs snapping underfoot. It never got so close that I thought it was going to charge, but it also never fell behind. It felt like it was shadowing us, following us as we walked out. I remember the feeling more than anything. It wasn't like a quick burst of fear. It was this long, stretched-out tension that stayed in my chest and stomach the whole time we were walking. I didn't look at my brother, but I could hear his footsteps next to mine. We kept moving, careful not to trip or stumble, because it felt like falling would be the worst possible thing we could do right then. Every few steps, the breathing would sound louder, then fade just a bit, but it was always there. There was a constant snorting sound too, like it was sniffing the air or warning us. I remember hearing a low huffing noise now and then, and each time, it made me stiffen up, expecting something to burst through the brush toward us. But it never did. I could hear my dad's boots crunching on the leaves and sticks. He kept his pace slow but steady. I could see the muscles in his shoulders were tight, like he was ready to move fast if he had to, but he was keeping us moving calmly. The truck wasn't that far, but the distance felt huge in that moment. Felt like we were walking forever. The worst part was never seeing it. I kept waiting for it to step out, for the shape to come into view. I was waiting to see a bear's head or its back or even just part of it through the leaves, but it always stayed just out of sight. That was what made it so scary. The sound was clear as day. The breathing, the heavy steps, the way it brushed against the bushes. But it stayed hidden. It was like it was deliberately staying just far enough back that we couldn't see it. As we got closer to the truck, I remember the ground started to change a little. There were more patches of gravel mixed in with the dirt, and the trees thinned out a bit. The sound behind us stayed steady. It didn't speed up or slow down. It just followed, like it was walking us out of its territory. When we finally reached the clearing where the truck was parked, I remember how wide open it suddenly felt. The sunlight hit hard out there, and the air felt different. There was more breeze, and I could hear the gravel crunching louder under our feet. The sound behind us stopped, just like that. It didn't fade slowly. It just stopped all at once. No more breathing, no more snapping twigs, no more snorting. It just cut off like someone hit a switch. My dad opened the truck door quickly, and my brother and I climbed in fast. I remember sitting there, clutching my berry bucket, not even thinking about the berries anymore. My dad looked back toward the woods for a long moment before getting in the truck. He started the engine, and we pulled out, the tires crunching loudly on the gravel. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the bear step out of the woods, but nothing moved. We didn't really talk about it right then. It was quiet in the truck for a while as we drove back down the gravel road. I think we all just needed to let the tension drain off before we could even say anything about it. The buckets with the berries sat between us on the seat, forgotten for a while. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was a bear, probably a mother with cubs nearby. It was doing what bears do, warning us to get out of its space. But the thing that stayed with me wasn't just the bear itself. It was the fact that we never saw it. It was right there, close enough to hear breathing, close enough to hear the snap of sticks under its feet, but it stayed hidden the whole time. That's what scared me the most. It made the woods feel alive in a different way, like there were things right next to you that you might never see. We didn't go back to that berry patch. Not that day, not later that summer, not ever. After that, we picked berries closer to home, in open places where you could see what was around you. And even though it's been years since that happened, I still think about it whenever I walk into the woods. I still listen for the breathing, for the sounds that might be there, just out of sight. It taught me something simple but important. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones you see, but the ones you hear and can't find, the ones that stay just out of reach but close enough to remind you that you're not alone. In the 1970s, when I was just a kid, maybe around 10 or 11, I went to the same summer day camp every year with my best friend. His name doesn't really matter now, but back then, he was the person I spent every summer day with. The camp itself wasn't much. It wasn't the kind with cabins or lakes or overnight stays. It was a basic day camp where your parents would drop you off in the morning and pick you up in the afternoon. There were simple activities like arts and crafts, swimming, and sports. Lots of sports. The counselors always pushed us to join the games. Baseball, soccer, relay races, whatever would burn off our energy and keep us busy. My friend and I hated all of it. We weren't into sports. We didn't like the noise, the teams, the pressure. We liked quiet places. We liked wandering off and finding things on our own. We wanted to be out in the woods where no one was telling us what to do. Once a week, the camp would take us to a state park for the day. They'd load all of us into these old, rattling school buses and drive us out there. It was a break from the regular campgrounds, and the counselors loved it because it gave them a big open space to set up games and spread everyone out. They'd mark off soccer fields, baseball diamonds, even kickball areas. They'd hand out balls and bats and expect us to spend hours playing. My friend and I always slipped away. We were never allowed to wander the woods alone, but that rule only worked if someone was watching. The counselors were busy organizing games and chasing after kids who didn't want to follow the rules. No one was counting heads after the initial setup. No one noticed when two quiet boys disappeared into the trees. The woods around the state park weren't wild or untouched. There were old trails winding through them, some overgrown, some still visible. Sometimes we'd come across a rusty fence, old soda cans, bits of rope, or crumbling stone foundations where buildings must have stood a long time ago. Most of the time, the woods were quiet, and we would spend our time kicking at fallen logs, looking for bugs, and poking sticks into the dirt like it was treasure hunting. One particular day still sticks with me, though. It was a warm summer afternoon, the kind where the air felt heavy but not too hot. We'd slipped away from the main group right after the counselors started setting up a baseball game. I remember walking down a faint path through the woods, one that looked like it had been made by deer or maybe just from other kids walking the same way over the years. The ground was soft with packed dirt, and leaves crunched under our sneakers. We wandered for a while, not really paying attention to how far we'd gone. We were in our own world. There was something about being in those woods that felt like we could be gone forever, like no one would find us unless we wanted them to. We weren't scared of getting lost back then. When you're a kid, you don't think about things like that. You just keep going. We passed old tree stumps, patches of wildflowers, and a few spots where the sun cut through the trees and lit the ground in bright shapes. The woods didn't feel dangerous. They just felt empty, quiet. I remember the steady sound of our footsteps, the way twigs would snap, the soft shush of our shoes over dead leaves. The only other sounds were birds and the occasional buzzing insect. It was along one of those paths that we found it. At first, it didn't even register as strange. It just looked like something left behind. Another piece of junk in the woods. It was a plastic milk crate, the kind with big open squares on the sides. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with small cardboard cartons of milk, the kind they give out at schools. Each carton was sealed, fresh and clean. They weren't crushed or dirty. They looked like they'd just come out of a delivery truck. There was no cooler, no ice, no packaging, no bags. Just the crate sitting by itself on the dirt, like someone had set it down and walked away. We stopped and stared at it for a long time. I remember the feeling of something being out of place, but I didn't fully understand why at first. It's not that finding trash in the woods was unusual. People dumped stuff all the time. We'd seen old cans, broken glass, even tires. But this was different. The milk wasn't spoiled. The cartons weren't swollen or leaking. They were still cold to the touch. That part stuck with me. When I reached down and put my hand on one of the cartons, it was cold, not warm from sitting in the sun. Cold like it had just come out of a refrigerator. There wasn't any cooler, no ice, no bag of any kind to keep it cold. Just that crate sitting in the dirt with cold milk inside. There was no reason for it to be there. We were deep enough into the woods that no picnic area, parking lot, or road was nearby. There was no path that a delivery truck could have used. No building in sight. It wasn't like someone had dropped it by accident. It was a full crate, neatly packed, and it hadn't been knocked over or disturbed. I remember standing there, just looking at it. My friend didn't touch it, but I did. I turned one of the cartons over in my hands. The expiration date was still a few days away. It was good milk. Clean, cold, fresh milk just sitting in the middle of nowhere. We didn't take any of it. We just stood there for a while trying to make sense of it. The whole time, I remember listening hard to the woods around us. The birds were still there, but there was something about the quiet that started to feel wrong. It felt like the woods had gone still in a way that wasn't natural, like something was waiting. After a minute, we started to walk away. Neither of us said anything about it. We just left the crate sitting there and made our way back toward the open fields where the camp games were happening. The longer we walked, the more I started to feel that tightness in my chest, like I was realizing that we shouldn't have been out there, that maybe we had come across something we weren't supposed to see. We didn't get caught. We just blended back in with the other kids like we'd been there the whole time. But the crate stayed in my head. It wasn't just weird, it was something that didn't make sense. I spent a long time thinking about it, even years later. As I got older, I started trying to figure out what it could have been. Maybe it was dumped by someone. Maybe a delivery guy from a nearby store or cafeteria thought it was spoiled and left it there to avoid dumping fees. But that didn't make sense because it was fresh. It was cold. It wasn't old stock. I thought maybe some nearby hikers or workers had stashed it, but there was no equipment, no signs of a work site, no trails wide enough for carts or vehicles. There weren't any homeless camps or makeshift shelters. The woods weren't used for that, and we would have seen something nearby if that were the case. There were no wrappers, no trash, no signs of anyone having eaten anything near there. I even thought maybe it was some kind of prank, but a crate of milk wasn't funny. It wasn't the kind of thing kids would haul out there for a joke. It was heavy, and it wasn't crushed or kicked over like something that had been abandoned in a hurry. It was just sitting there perfectly, like it had been placed there for a reason. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that sometimes things get left in places they shouldn't be. Sometimes people do things that don't make sense to anyone else. Maybe it was meant for someone. Maybe it was a drop-off. Maybe someone would come by later to pick it up. Maybe we had stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see. When I picture it now, I still see the crate exactly as it was. Bright white milk cartons, the top sealed, the crate clean, sitting in the dirt like it belonged there. But it didn't. We never told the counselors. We never told our parents. It just became one of those things that you keep to yourself. When you're a kid, you don't always understand the weight of something being out of place. You just feel it in your gut. I never found out why it was there. I don't know who put it there or who it was meant for, but I know what I saw. It wasn't old, it wasn't spoiled, it wasn't trash. It was fresh. It was ready for someone, and we were probably never meant to see it. What still bothers me, even now, is that we didn't hear anyone else in the woods. No voices, no footsteps, no sound of someone carrying a heavy crate through the trees. The milk was fresh and cold. It hadn't been sitting there long. Someone had put it there not too long before we found it, and yet the woods were silent. Whoever left it was gone, or maybe they were never far away. Sometimes when I think about it, I wonder if someone was watching us. If maybe they had seen us come across their drop. If maybe they were waiting nearby to see what we would do. Maybe they were just out of sight, like we had always stayed out of sight from the counselors. Hidden but close. That's what stuck with me. Not the milk itself, not the crate, but the idea that someone had been there, probably still was there, and we never saw them. That was the last time my friend and I wandered that far during camp. After that, we stuck closer to the groups, pretended to care about soccer, stayed where the counselors could see us. Not because we were afraid of getting lost, but because we'd found something that didn't belong, and we knew there were things in the woods that didn't have easy explanations. I've been back to that park as an adult. I've walked those trails, trying to remember the exact path we took, trying to see if maybe there was something I missed back then. I never found that spot again. The paths have changed. Some are gone, some are overgrown. But that one memory is still clear. That crate, sitting in the dirt, fresh milk inside, waiting for someone who wasn't us. When I was around 12 years old, I was a member of my local Boy Scout troop. We used to go on a lot of hikes, camping trips, and outdoor activities, and I always enjoyed them. My parents thought it would be good for me, and honestly, I liked the break from school and the chance to be out in nature with my friends. I was close with one of the other boys in the troop, a kid named Kevin. We usually stuck together during hikes, campouts, and all the other trips. We didn't talk a lot to the other boys. It was usually just the two of us doing our own thing while still technically staying part of the group. One trip I remember more than any other happened when we went hiking in a state forest. It was a long day hike, just a simple trail loop that our troop leader had planned out. It was nothing difficult, just some ups and downs through the trees, past a few streams and rock formations, and then back around to the parking lot. We were going to finish the hike, eat some sandwiches, and then head back home. It seemed like it would be just another ordinary trip. We started out in the morning, walking as a group along the trail. Everyone was talking and joking, but Kevin and I gradually drifted toward the back of the group like we usually did. We liked to hang back, take our time, and look around the woods while the others stayed focused on moving ahead. I remember the weather was decent that day, not too hot, with a little breeze moving through the trees. The trail was dry, the air was fresh, and the whole forest smelled like pine and dirt. After walking for maybe an hour or so, we came to a place where the trail curved sharply around a cluster of large boulders. Kevin and I spotted a smaller path leading off into the trees, just barely visible, like an old animal trail or maybe something hikers had made by walking the same route over and over. It didn't look official, but that made it more interesting to us. We had a habit of slipping away from the main group to explore places like that. We probably weren't supposed to, but back then we didn't think about rules too much. We just wanted to see something new. Without thinking much about it, Kevin and I left the main trail and started following this side path. It led us through thicker woods, where the trees grew closer together and the sunlight came down in smaller patches. The ground was covered in dry leaves, sticks, and patches of moss. We kept walking, stepping over fallen branches and weaving between tree trunks, not really knowing where we were going, just following the path as far as it would take us. At first, it felt like a fun little adventure, the kind of thing we always did. We figured we would explore for a few minutes, maybe find something cool like a stream, a big rock, or some kind of animal, and then we'd head back to the trail before anyone noticed we were gone. But as we kept walking, the woods started to feel different. They grew quieter. The sounds of the other boys laughing and the crunch of the group walking faded until there was only the sound of our own footsteps and the occasional bird. We pushed through some low branches and came into a small clearing. At first, I didn't notice anything strange. It just looked like an open space with a few tree stumps and a lot of pine needles on the ground. Kevin walked a little ahead of me, scanning the area like he was trying to find something interesting to look at. Then I saw him stop, dead still, just standing there staring at something up ahead. I walked up next to him, wondering what he was looking at, and that's when I saw it too. Hanging from one of the thick tree branches was a person. A real person. It took a second for my brain to understand what I was seeing. I think part of me didn't want to believe it right away. The body was hanging by the neck, a rope tied around the branch above and the other end around the person's throat. The legs hung loosely. The head was tilted forward at a strange angle. The body wasn't moving at all. For a few seconds, I just stared at it, frozen, like Kevin was. I remember every tiny detail from that moment, as if time slowed down. The person was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. The shoes looked like work boots. The rope cut deep into the skin around the neck, and the face was pale and empty. I didn't see any movement at all, no sign of life. The body just hung there like a terrible, heavy thing that didn't belong in the middle of the woods. It felt like something cracked open in my mind right then. My chest got tight, and my stomach twisted. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My feet felt glued to the ground. Kevin was completely silent next to me, and I could tell he was just as shocked as I was. We didn't speak. We didn't even look at each other. We both just stared at the hanging figure like it wasn't real. Eventually, something inside me told me we had to go back. We couldn't stay there. My legs finally listened, and I turned around and started walking away quickly. Kevin followed me, still silent. We retraced our steps, pushing back through the trees, stepping over branches, and rushing back to where we had left the main trail. The sounds of the forest seemed louder now. The birds, the wind, the crunch of our feet. It was like the world came back into focus after the shock of what we had seen. When we got back to the trail, we saw the rest of our troop far ahead. We hurried to catch up, not saying a word to each other. When we reached them, we just blended back into the group. I remember feeling like I had dropped back into normal life, but inside I didn't feel normal at all. I felt sick. I felt shaky. My head was spinning, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. The rest of the hike passed in a blur. I didn't pay attention to anything else that day. The lunch we had afterward tasted like nothing. I barely remember the ride home. All I could think about was the person hanging in that tree, the way the body hung so still, the way the face looked so empty. It burned into my memory in a way that I couldn't shake. Kevin and I never talked about it. Not once. We didn't tell our troop leader. We didn't tell our parents. I don't even know why we stayed silent. Maybe we were afraid we would get in trouble for wandering off the trail. Maybe we were just too young to know how to handle something like that. It felt like something too big for us, something we didn't have the words for. But I know it stayed with me. I would think about it often, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes when I was walking through the woods years later. I would picture the exact way the rope looked against the skin, the way the boots hung in the air, the way the clearing was so quiet. It became one of those moments that divides life into before and after. Over the years, I would sometimes read about missing person cases or suicides in state parks. There are more than you might think. Sometimes people walk into the woods on purpose and never plan to come back. Sometimes hikers find them by accident. I've often wondered about the person we found that day. Who were they? How long had they been there before we stumbled upon them? Did anyone else ever find them? Did anyone ever report them missing? I'll never know the answers. I'll never know their name, their story, or what led them to that tree. All I know is what I saw and how it has stayed with me. I've gone on many hikes since then, through many forests and along many trails. But every time I see a clearing, a thick branch, or even just a piece of rope, part of my mind snaps back to that moment in the woods when Kevin and I took a wrong turn and found something we were never supposed to see. It changed the way I look at the woods. Changed the way I look at life, too. Sometimes you stumble into things you'll carry with you forever, whether you wanted to find them or not. I've had plenty of hiking trips over the years, but there's one that still sticks with me like a shadow I can't quite shake. It's strange how a simple outing can change the way you look at the world, even if it seems like nothing should have gone wrong. This happened when I was in my late 20s. I had been dealing with a lot of stress from work, and hiking had always been my escape. I was living in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by endless trails, tall pine forests, and quiet lakes. I usually went alone because I liked the quiet. It gave me time to think, time to just move my legs and let the noise of everyday life fall away. One Saturday, I decided to try a trail I hadn't done before. It wasn't far from town, maybe an hour's drive, and it was listed as a moderate loop that would take about 4 hours to complete. It seemed perfect, a good length to clear my head, but not so long that I'd get back after dark. I packed the usual things: water, snacks, a basic first aid kit, a flashlight just in case, and my old hiking boots that had seen better days but still held together. I left my apartment around 7 in the morning and reached the trailhead by 8. There were a few cars in the gravel parking lot, so I wasn't the only one out there, but it wasn't crowded either. I liked that. I nodded at a couple of people who were just starting out with their dogs, but otherwise I kept to myself. The trail started out easy. Tall trees on both sides, soft dirt underfoot, the kind of peaceful quiet where you can hear birds and the distant sound of a stream. I settled into a steady pace, breathing in the cool morning air. The trail wound up slowly, climbing a gentle hill with occasional wooden markers along the way. After about an hour, I hadn't seen anyone else. I liked it that way, felt like the whole forest was mine. At some point, maybe an hour and a half in, I saw a small side path leading off the main trail. It wasn't on the map I had, but sometimes local hikers create their own small routes. I figured I had time, so I decided to check it out. It looked like it would circle back eventually. The side path was narrower, the brush a little thicker, but it wasn't difficult to follow. I walked for about 15 minutes when I started to notice that the trees here were a bit older, the canopy denser. Less light came through, and the air felt cooler. The ground was a little damp, probably from rain earlier in the week. I was starting to think about turning back when I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. There was a backpack lying just off the path, leaning against a fallen log. It looked out of place, like it had been left there on purpose. It wasn't old or weathered. It looked fairly new, like someone had just set it down. I hesitated, unsure if I should approach it, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer and crouched down to take a look. It was a simple black hiking pack, nothing fancy. The zippers were closed, and I didn't feel right opening it. Maybe someone had just wandered off and would be back for it. But there was no one around. I listened carefully. No footsteps, no voices, just the quiet hum of the woods. I straightened up and looked around more carefully. That's when I noticed something else, maybe 10 feet further off the trail. It was a jacket, crumpled in a heap on the ground. A few feet from that, a water bottle tipped over in the dirt. Something didn't feel right. I didn't see anyone nearby. No sounds, no signs of someone moving around to retrieve their things. I kept walking, slowly now, scanning the ground and the trees around me. The deeper I went, the more scattered items I found. A pair of sunglasses, an energy bar still in its wrapper, a small map folded neatly and stuck between some rocks. It was like someone had been moving through here, leaving things behind, but not in a way that made sense. Not like someone dropped things by accident. It looked more like someone had set them down as they walked, or maybe even discarded them on purpose. The path got narrower, the trees pressing in closer, until I came to a small clearing. It wasn't much, just a break in the trees with low grass and a couple of mossy rocks. And in the middle of the clearing was, I don't even know how to describe it. There was a pile, a carefully arranged pile of personal items. Shoes, a hat, more clothing, a half-empty water bottle, a set of car keys, even a wallet just sitting there on top of a folded jacket. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. Something about the way the items were placed didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate, like someone had taken each item off, one by one, and stacked them carefully before walking away. I picked up the wallet. There was an ID inside, a man probably in his 30s. His address was from a town about 2 hours away. There was some cash, a few cards. Nothing strange about the contents. I set the wallet back down exactly as I found it and backed away. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I didn't want to be near it anymore. The whole scene made me feel cold, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I turned back the way I came, moving quickly but not running. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see anyone. The woods were still quiet, still peaceful, but the peace felt wrong now. Felt too empty. When I got back to the main trail, I thought about whether I should keep hiking the loop or just head back to my car. I decided to leave. I couldn't enjoy the rest of the hike with that image stuck in my head. I made it back to the parking lot and sat in my car for a while, thinking. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't like I had seen a body or anything, just a pile of stuff that seemed out of place. Eventually, I drove to the nearest ranger station, about 20 minutes away. I told the ranger what I had seen. I gave him the trail name and described the side path and the clearing. He took notes and thanked me for reporting it. He didn't say much else. I never followed up. I figured if they needed more information, they'd contact me, but they never did. For weeks after, I kept thinking about that pile. I kept wondering what had happened there. Had someone gotten lost? Had they wandered off in some kind of mental break? Or worse, sometimes I think maybe the person had wanted to disappear. The careful arrangement of their things made me think they weren't in a hurry. They had taken their time. Years have gone by since then, but that image is burned into my memory. I've hiked many times since, but I've never left the main trails again. I don't explore side paths anymore. I guess some things out there you're just not meant to find. I don't know if the ranger found anything else. I don't know what the official explanation was. I've stopped wondering. Some answers don't come. But I can tell you this. I've never felt the same about being alone in the woods. It's not the sounds that bother me anymore. It's the quiet. It's the things you find that no one ever comes back for.